Evan had never seen someone sit as quietly as the blue-skinned girl in the corner of the refugee shelter. While the other rescued aliens sometimes talked among themselves or watched the screen showing news broadcasts, she stayed almost statue-like, hands resting calmly on the armrests of the floating chair that supported her. Her name was Leora, that was all he knew. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was only a few words. But there was something about her eyes, a bright silver glow beneath long dark lashes that made Evan feel she noticed everything around her, even if she pretended not to. Evan was not a doctor or a soldier. He was simply a mechanic who fixed drones and delivery bots in the nearby town. After work, instead of going home, he often visited the shelter to help maintain damaged prosthetics or clean malfunctioning equipment. He was not assigned to Leora, yet every day he somehow ended up checking her chair, polishing its edges, making sure the hover unit hummed smoothly beneath her seat. She never asked him to. She never thanked him, but he kept coming back, still working. One of the human nurses joked as she passed by. Evan looked up with a sheepish smile. Her chair's got a slight tilt. Drives me crazy, he replied, adjusting a bolt beneath the left support. Leora's gaze slowly shifted toward him. She did not blink. Evan pretended not to notice and kept talking, hoping she would react even a little. You know, I once tried to make a racing drone, he said casually, but it was too fast for its own good. It flew straight through my neighbor's window. She still thinks it was a spying device. He laughed at his own story. Leora did not. But her eyes softened, almost like she wanted to laugh but did not know how. On most days, Evan told her random stories. Sometimes he talked about his pet turtle. Other times he complained about how badly humans drove their vehicles despite having AI assistance. He did not know whether she understood everything he said, but she always listened. That was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the translucent glass roof of the shelter, Evan approached her chair and leaned against the wall beside her without touching her. You ever seen an ocean? He asked suddenly. Leora turned her head slowly. Her lips parted slightly, and after a moment of hesitation, she whispered, No. Her voice was soft and smooth, almost musical. Evan had to stop himself from staring too long. Well, he said, pointing toward the distance as if the ocean were right outside. It's like a giant mirror, but instead of showing your face, it shows the sky, and when the wind blows, it looks like it's dancing. Leora blinked once, her silver eyes reflecting curiosity. I want to see, she murmured. Evan felt something tug deeply inside him. He did not know whether it was excitement or responsibility. Maybe both. Then I'll take you, he declared with a grin. The nearest ocean was 3 hours away by vehicle. Normally that would not be a problem. But Leora's health records, limited as they were, indicated her body was weak, possibly damaged from previous injuries. The alien medics warned against long-distance travel. They insisted her condition was too unstable. But Evan was stubborn. He spent the next 2 nights in his workshop, modifying a hoverchair frame he had salvaged from an old transport drone. He widened the seating base, reinforced the anti-grav coils, attached cushioned armrests, and even installed a retractable sunshade. He painted the edges silver to match Leora's eyes, then carefully tested it with heavy crates to ensure stability. By the time he brought it to the shelter, his hair was messy, his eyes had dark circles, and his shirt was stained with grease. But when he rolled the upgraded chair toward Leora, he stood tall like a proud inventor, unveiling a masterpiece. She stared at it in silence. It's for you, he said, a little shyly. Stronger, smoother ride, no more tilting. She looked from the chair to him, then back at the chair. Slowly, she placed her hand on its armrest. You built this? Yeah, well, it's not perfect, but her fingers curled gently around the edge. For the first time, he saw clear emotion in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Evan's heart did a backflip. The guards were reluctant to let them leave, but Evan signed a responsibility waiver. He promised to bring her back by evening. He helped her transfer into the new chair and adjusted the straps gently. As they exited the shelter, several other refugees watched in quiet surprise. Some smiled. Some whispered among themselves. Leora kept her gaze forward, expression unreadable. The road was long, winding through rolling green hills. The hover chair glided smoothly at first, humming softly as it followed behind Evan's walking pace. He talked constantly, mostly to fill the silence. Once we get there, I'll find a spot with soft sand. You can touch it. It's warmer than it looks. And the air? It tastes like salt. Well, not exactly like salt, more like fresh freedom. He laughed awkwardly, realizing how silly his description sounded. But when he glanced back, Leora was watching him, her lips curved the tiniest bit upward. They passed through a patch of uneven terrain where the chair began to vibrate. Evan frowned. "Hold on," he warned. But before he could adjust settings, one of the support engines sputtered. The chair jerked slightly. Leora tensed, gripping the armrests. "It's okay," Evan assured, squatting down to check the engine. One coil had overheated. He tried to reboot it, but it flickered stubbornly. He stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All right." New plan. Before Leora could question him, he bent down and gently lifted her into his arms. She stiffened instantly, hands pressing against his chest. "Wait," she began. But he adjusted his grip securely. "Careful not to hurt her." "Don't worry," he said, breathing heavily but smiling. "I told you I'd get you to the ocean." "I didn't say how." She looked at him, startled. No one had ever held her like this. Not with such casual certainty. Not without asking for permission, yet still respectful. His arms were strong but gentle. His steps unsteady but determined. The wind brushed against her face as he walked. The sky stretched endlessly above. She had spent so long confined to walls and metal rooms that she had forgotten what open air felt like. Now resting against his chest, she could hear his heartbeat thudding steadily beneath her ear. After several minutes, she spoke softly. "I am heavy," Evan chuckled between breaths. "You're lighter than my toolbox." She remained silent, unsure whether to believe him. Yet something inside her loosened. She stopped resisting and let herself relax. They walked across grassy fields and rocky paths. Occasionally, Evan would pause to rest, placing her gently on a smooth rock or patch of grass while stretching his arms. Each time she watched him with wary fascination. "You are not required to do this," she said at one point. "I know," he replied, lifting her again. "But I want to." "Why?" He looked at her as if the answer was obvious. "Because you wanted to see the ocean." Leora had no response. She did not understand this kind of kindness. On her world, favors were always traded. Assistance was always earned. No one acted without expecting something in return. Yet this human simply helped. The air grew cooler. The sound of wind shifted. Instead of rustling grass, it now carried a distant roar. Leora's eyes widened. "What is that?" she asked. Evan smiled tiredly. "Waves." As they reached the crest of a hill, the view unfolded before them like a dream. Vast water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, shimmering under the sun. White-capped waves rolled rhythmically, crashing against a sandy shore that glowed golden beneath the light. Leora gasped. She did not blink. She did not move. Her silver eyes reflected the ocean as if it were inside her. Evan carried her down the slope slowly, his legs trembling from exhaustion. When they reached the sand, he knelt carefully and placed her on a firm spot near the shore, where water gently approached but did not cover them. He sat beside her, panting heavily. "There it is," he said between breaths. "Ocean, as promised." Leora stared at the waves in silence. The sound, the constant crash and retreat, was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was wild, untamed, and yet comforting. Like a heartbeat of the world, she lowered her hand and touched the sand. It was warm, grainy, soft. She let it slip between her fingers slowly. Evan watched her quietly, leaning back on his hands. He smiled. Not the energetic one he usually wore, but a gentle, peaceful one. After a long moment, he spoke. "Worth the trouble?" Leora did not answer. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She swallowed, unsure how to express what she felt. Evan laughed softly. "I must look ridiculous. Covered in sweat. Probably smell terrible. If you could walk, you'd probably kick me for making you bounce so much earlier." He said it as a joke. But something in his words pierced her heart. She turned to him. Her lips trembled. She whispered, so softly it almost disappeared beneath the wind. "I can walk," Evan blinked. "What?" Leora looked down at her legs. She slowly moved her toes. Then she placed her hands on the sand and pushed herself up slightly. Evan stared in disbelief. "Wait, are you saying—" She stood, not perfectly. Her knees shook. But she stood. Evan's eyes widened. He rose to his feet instinctively, unsure whether to help or step back. Leora took a shaky step forward toward the water. The waves touched her feet. She gasped at the cold sensation, then looked back at Evan with tears in her luminous eyes. "I lied," she said softly, "not paralyzed. I could walk. But on my world, physical touch is sacred. No one carries another unless they are bound. When you lifted me, I did not know how to stop you." "I did not want to stop you." Evan stood beside Leora, feeling the cool ocean water lap gently over their feet. The silver glow of her eyes reflected the sunlight in a way he had never seen before, and he realized that this moment, the quiet, the waves, the air filled with salt was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. The distance between them felt smaller than ever, though neither had spoken more than a few words since she had stood. Leora took another tentative step forward, testing her balance, and then another. Evan stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled, though she hardly needed it. A smile slowly spread across her face. It was shy, small at first, but genuine. She lifted her hands slightly and let them brush the tips of the foamy waves, feeling the rhythm of the water as it came and went. She had never touched the ocean before, never even imagined it could exist like this, wild and free, stretching endlessly into the horizon. You're really strong," she said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't know humans were like this." Her voice was tentative, curious, and carried the weight of someone who had seen much suffering. Evan chuckled. "I don't know if I'm strong," he replied. I didn't want to let you down. You wanted to see this, so I figured I'd carry you all the way if I had to." He shrugged, trying to make it sound casual, but his chest was still pounding from the effort. She tilted her head and studied him. Her gaze was quiet but intense. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind tugged at their hair, the water danced around their feet, and somewhere beyond the horizon a seabird cried sharply. It was perfect in its imperfection, and Leora felt something shift inside her, a strange warmth she didn't understand yet. "I didn't need to be carried," she said finally, her voice low and careful, almost like she was confessing a secret. "I could have walked. I wanted to see if someone would do it without expecting anything." Her eyes shone in the sunlight, silver against blue skin, and Evan realized she had chosen honesty in her own way, slowly, like a flower opening. Evan took a step closer and looked at her seriously. "And you think that mattered?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the waves swirl around her feet and leaned down, letting the water wash over her hands. When she looked back, there was a softness in her gaze, a flicker of trust that Evan felt like he had been waiting for without knowing it. "Yes," she said finally. "It mattered more than I can explain." He smiled faintly, trying to hide the sudden warmth that surged through his chest. "Well, that's good to know," he said quietly, "because you didn't exactly make this easy for me." Leora tilted her head, lips twitching in the smallest attempt at a smile. "You think it was hard?" she asked, curiosity lacing her words. Evan laughed lightly. "Try carrying someone who weighs more than half a toolbox while walking across hills and rocky fields." "I'd call that hard." She laughed then too, a soft sound, musical and hesitant, and Evan realized that for the first time in a long time she felt truly free. She moved closer to the edge of the water, letting the small waves lap against her ankles. Then, without looking at him, she crouched down and scooped up a handful of wet sand. She let it slip slowly through her fingers, fascinated by how it moved, by how easily it obeyed gravity, yet still clung to her palms. Evan watched her quietly, marveling at the simplicity of her joy. In a world full of chaos and suffering, this small fleeting happiness was extraordinary. He wondered if she had ever felt anything like it before. "Do you want to touch it deeper?" he asked gently, nodding toward the water that stretched farther out, waves cresting and falling endlessly. She glanced at him, eyes wide. I've never gone that far," she admitted. "I don't know if I should." Evan smiled reassuringly. "Then we'll go together. I'll stay close. Nothing will happen." Slowly, she moved forward, letting the water rise to her knees, then her thighs. The water was colder than she expected, but invigorating. Evan stayed beside her, stepping carefully through the sand, feeling it shift beneath his boots. She reached out and touched his arm lightly, not in a demanding way, but in a quiet gesture of trust, and he felt a jolt run through him. He looked at her, surprised, and she quickly withdrew her hand, cheeks flushed with what he assumed was embarrassment. "You're not scared of water?" he asked casually, trying to sound nonchalant. She shook her head. No, not really. But it's different, strange, than it's supposed to be, he said. If it felt safe, it wouldn't be special. He smiled at her, a small, genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. She had seen many humans before, some kind, some cruel, some indifferent. But none had ever cared like this, purely without expectation. She looked at him silently, eyes wide and thoughtful. After a moment she spoke, almost as if testing the words aloud. Why would you care about me like this? Evan hesitated. It was not an easy question. He had never really thought about it. He helped because it felt right. He carried her because it was necessary. But hearing her ask, hearing the vulnerability in her voice made him realize it was more than duty. It was choice. Because someone has to, he said finally. And because you matter. Even if you don't know it yet. Leora blinked. Her lips parted slightly and she looked at him with an intensity he had not expected. For a moment she seemed to weigh every word he had ever said. Every step he had taken to bring her here. Every moment she had spent in silence beside him. Then she smiled, small, tentative, and completely genuine. The sun was starting to dip lower, painting the water in hues of gold and pink. Evan realized they had been standing there for hours, neither noticing how much time had passed. The wind tugged gently at their clothes, carrying the distant cries of seabirds and the endless, soothing crash of waves. Leora took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs in a way that made her chest ache pleasantly. She had never felt this alive before. Not on her planet, not in any safe room, not in any moment of quiet observation. Here with the water and the sky and the human who had carried her, she understood what freedom could feel like. Evan watched her, standing silently beside her, careful not to intrude, careful to simply be present. There was no rush, no expectation, just a quiet understanding that this moment was theirs. She glanced at him again, eyes filled with something she could not name. Gratitude, wonder, maybe even a tiny spark of affection. I lied about being paralyzed, she said softly, almost as a confession. I wanted to see if someone could care without asking for anything in return. You proved that someone can. Evan nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'm glad I could. But don't worry. I didn't carry you because I expected anything. I carried you because it was the right thing to do. For the first time, she understood. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. A warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar and comforting. She wanted to speak more, to explain herself, but words failed her. Instead, she simply stepped closer to the water, feeling it rise around her thighs. Then she turned to Evan and, in a gesture she had never made before, reached out and held his hand. Evan froze for a moment, surprised by the touch, then smiled softly. He did not pull away. The connection was simple, human, and alien at once, a silent acknowledgement of trust and choice. The waves continued their endless rhythm. The wind whispered through the air. And for the first time in both their lives, nothing else mattered. They stood together, two beings from completely different worlds, sharing a single perfect moment that could not be replicated, bought or sold. Evan felt something inside him shift, a recognition that this small act of care, lifting someone, walking with them, choosing to help without expectation, was stronger than any weapon or machine he had ever built. Leora squeezed his hand lightly, a gesture that spoke more than words ever could. She did not need to explain herself. The honesty of her actions, the vulnerability she had shown, was enough. For hours they walked along the shoreline, letting the water rush over their feet, letting the sand squish between their toes, letting the wind carry away worries neither had voiced. Evan spoke occasionally, telling silly stories about his childhood, his failed inventions, and his love of sunsets. Leora listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes laughing softly, letting herself exist in this strange, wonderful new freedom. As the sun finally began to set, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, Leora paused and turned to Evan. Thank you, she whispered again. Not just for today, but for everything. Evan smiled, squeezing her hand gently. No need to thank me. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because someone had to, and I'm glad it was me. They stood there together, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The world felt vast, alive, and full of possibility, and in that moment, neither was concerned with past wounds, rules, or differences. There was only trust, only the simple, unspoken connection between two beings who had chosen to be present for each other. And for Leora, the ocean was no longer just a dream. It was a promise kept, and for Evan, the act of carrying her, of walking through hardship without expectation, had become the most human thing he had ever done. As darkness fell, they finally sat on the sand side by side, hands still intertwined, watching the moon rise over the water. Waves rolled in silently now, and a quiet sense of peace settled over them. Leora realized that she had been given a gift far greater than the ocean itself.